He found a trembling puppy in the freezing dark, guarding a small pink backpack like it was life itself. No tag, no name, no owner. Yet the puppy refused to leave, as if waiting for someone worth dying for. What hid inside that backpack would expose a secret no one believed and test whether faith still survives in broken hearts. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Winter pinned Denver under a low, iron sky as the highway carved a gray scar through the snow, a place where people rushed past one another, windows up, hearts sealed tighter than the doors of their cars. Ethan Walker sat alone behind the wheel of his aging pickup, letting the tires hum a dull, steady note over the frozen asphalt. He told himself he was just out for a drive, the way he'd told himself yesterday and the day before that. If he kept the truck moving, the silence of the house couldn't catch him. That was the bargain: movement instead of memory, miles instead of grief. He adjusted the heater one-handed, more from habit than hope. The vents blew air that was warm-ish at best, but he barely noticed the cold. The chill he carried rode deep inside his ribs where no dashboard dial could reach. Traffic crawled in slow, metallic lines, headlights ghosting through light flurries. Families going home, couples, people with grocery bags, holiday decorations, plans. Ethan watched them with the distant, almost scientific curiosity of a man standing outside a window, seeing a life he no longer believed in. You used to rush home too, he thought. Back when home meant something more than a roof, four walls, and the loud echo of someone missing. He checked his mirrors, scanned the lanes, then the shoulder. Old instincts. A lifetime of training had carved them into his nervous system, check for threats, for patterns, for anything that didn't belong. Even now, years out of uniform, his eyes could not stop working. Usually the shoulder offered nothing but shredded tires, broken bumpers, the occasional abandoned sedan, mouths gaping open for a tow truck that would eventually come. But today, a small shape snagged his gaze. At first, it was nothing, just a smudge of darker color on the pale, slushy edge of the world. Then the smudge resolved itself into something that made his chest tighten, a tiny fist closing around his heart. He saw a backpack, and something huddled on top of it. He was already easing his foot off the gas before his mind had the words. His hand found the turn signal late. He merged toward the shoulder on instinct, not courtesy. Horns complained behind him, but their anger sounded thin, far away. As the truck rolled to a stop, the shape came into focus. Snow had crusted lightly over it, the powder gathering along the seams of a small, pale pink backpack lying crooked in the slush. On top of it, pressed against the fabric as if trying to disappear inside, curled a puppy. A German shepherd pup, too young. Much too young to be out here alone. It was still. Not the deep, easy stillness of sleep, but the brittle kind, like glass trying not to crack. Tiny ribs moved in shallow, cautious breaths. A faint tremor shivered through its body when a semi roared past, spraying dirty snow that slapped against Ethan's truck. Nobody stopped. Ethan killed the engine. For a moment he stayed where he was, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar spike of anger, sharp, clean, slice through the numbness. Anger was easy. He understood anger. It had edges. But underneath it, something else stirred. Something softer, more dangerous. He opened the door. Winter hit him full in the face, a slap of air that smelled of exhaust, wet asphalt, and old snow. He stepped down onto the shoulder, the crunch beneath his boots startling the puppy. It flinched, but it didn't run. That was the first thing that struck him. Any normal pup would have bolted from the sudden noise, from the looming bulk of a man stepping out of a truck. This one just pressed tighter into the backpack, as if welding itself to it. "Easy," Ethan said, voice low. It came out rough, unused, like a door hinge that hadn't been moved in a while. "I'm not here to hurt you, kiddo." The puppy's head lifted a fraction. He could see its eyes now, too big for its face, dark with a kind of bewildered courage. The wind tugged at its ears. It blinked slowly, as if the effort of keeping them pointed at him cost something. 1 to 2 months old, he estimated automatically, too small, too soft-boned, too new to the world to understand how badly the world could treat it. And yet here it was, alone on a winter highway, planted like a sentry over a child's backpack. Who leaves you here? The thought arrived bitter, incredulous. Another, quieter one followed close behind it. People leave all kinds of things behind, Walker. Some of them even walked into it willingly. He pushed that away. Not now. He approached slowly, one step at a time, like he would have once approached a frightened civilian in a war zone. Same rules. Make yourself predictable. Make yourself small. Don't crowd. The air vibrated with the rush of passing cars, each gust sending a tremor through the pup's small body, but it did not abandon its post. If anything, it pressed down harder. Ethan knelt a few feet away, the cold seeping through his jeans almost. Immediately. From here he could see that the backpack wasn't just lying beneath the puppy. One of its straps was looped loosely around the animal's middle, as if someone had set it down in a hurry, and it had simply never wriggled free. Or maybe, a part of him suggested, it never tried. The backpack itself was scuffed and faded, pink dulled by time and weather. Stickers clung stubbornly to the fabric, little stars, a crooked rainbow, what might once have been a cartoon cat. On the top flap, just above the zipper, someone had written a name in thick, childish letters. The snow had blurred them, but he could make out a curve here, a line there, a child's possession, not just a bag, a piece of someone. The pup watched him. Those eyes were doing something he recognized. They were evaluating, measuring. In some deep, instinctive way, the little creature was trying to decide if Ethan was danger or not. "Yeah," he murmured. "I get it. I don't trust people either." He held out a hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. The puppy sniffed the air. He saw its nose twitch, saw its tiny chest rise a little faster, but it didn't stretch forward to meet him. It stayed where it was, rooted to the backpack, like a flag driven into frozen ground. Loyalty, he thought, stupid, unbreakable loyalty. He had seen that posture before, on desert rooftops, behind broken walls, in eyes that refused to leave a post even when the smart move was to run. "I'm going to help," he said quietly, more solemn now, "but I can't do it from back here." His knees protested as he shifted closer. The pup made a soft sound, not quite a whine, but something close. It raised one paw as if to move, to flee, and then let it fall back onto the pink fabric with stubborn finality. It wasn't protecting itself from him, Ethan realized. It was protecting the bag. The thought struck with the clarity of old training. This isn't random. This is a behavior. Someone gave it a job. But who gives a job like that to a creature this small? A memory surfaced without permission. His own son at 6, chin lifted trying to carry Ethan's pack from the front door to the truck, nearly tipping over under the weight, but refusing to let go. "I can do it, Dad. I'm strong enough." He had laughed then, gently, but he had laughed. He wondered now if that had been a mistake. The ache in his chest sharpened. He swallowed it down. The highway howled at his back. "Okay," Ethan said, more to himself than to the pup. New plan. Instead of going straight for the puppy, he laid his hand lightly on the backpack itself. The fabric was damp and cold. He could feel the faint shape of something hard inside. Books, maybe, or something else. The pup tensed, every bit of its tiny body going on alert. It didn't snap, didn't lunge, but a tiny sound escaped it, thin, strained, utterly determined. The kind of sound that said, as clearly as words, "This is mine to watch." Not aggression, he thought. Duty. "I hear you," he told it. "I'm not taking it away. I'm just moving the whole package, all right?" He slid his hand under the backpack, lifting it slowly. The strap around the pup's belly tightened. For a second, it dangled awkwardly, little paws scrabbling at the air. Ethan's other arm shot out, catching the small body before it could fall. The instant his hand wrapped around it, the pup stiffened. Its heart hammered against his palm like a tiny fist, frantic and hot. Ethan braced himself for teeth, claws, a desperate fight, but none came. Instead, to his surprise, the puppy twisted just enough to tuck itself against his forearm, nose nudging anxiously at the backpack that now rested against his chest. It was as if it were saying, "As long as that stays with us, I'll allow this." He stood, lifting both pup and pack in one motion. Gravel crunched under his boots, cold gnawed at his fingers where they gripped the straps. The pup trembled, whether from chill or exhaustion or the enormity of what was happening, he couldn't tell. But its eyes stayed fixed on the pink bag. Behind him, a car honked irritably, as if offended by the sight of a man pausing on the margin of the world to pick up something the world had decided was disposable. "Yeah," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Keep driving." He moved back to the truck, cradling the bundle of fur and fabric like something that might break if jostled too hard. Some part of him whispered that he was overreacting, that he should call animal control, let professionals handle it, go back to his careful routine of drifting through days without attachments. But another part, a deeper, older part, honed by years of taking responsibility when others looked away, knew he'd already made the decision the moment he'd hit the brakes. He opened the passenger door and set the backpack gently on the seat, keeping hold of the pup. It twisted, reaching for the bag with its nose, until its forehead bumped the zipper. Only then did it relax a fraction, the tremors in its body easing from violent shakes to faint shivers. "You really think that thing is your whole world, huh?" he asked softly. The pup blinked at him, eyes heavy, but there was a strange steadiness there, a kind of ferocious infant resolve. Ethan exhaled a white plume of breath in the cold air. "All right," he said, "then we'll save your world first." He climbed in, pulling the door shut, the cab filled with the muffled roar of the heater and the distant thunder of traffic. The pup curled instinctively toward the backpack, pressing its tiny body along its side, as if to shield it from some invisible threat. Ethan put the truck in gear but did not pull out immediately. His hand rested on the wheel. His gaze lingered on the backpack, on the faint, blurred name on the flap, on the little stickers that had somehow survived snow and salt and neglect. He didn't know what was inside. He didn't know who had carried it last or why they'd never come back for it. But he knew this. Someone had trusted that puppy with something important. Someone had made a promise through small hands and childish ink, and the world had answered that promise with cold and indifference. Ethan Walker, who had once sworn oaths in rooms full of flags and brass and never quite forgiven himself for the ones he'd failed to keep, felt the old machinery of duty creak back to life inside his chest. "This isn't your mission," he told himself. "You don't owe these people anything." The words sounded weak, even in his own mind. He pulled out onto the highway, merging back into the river of moving metal. Snow streaked past the windshield in thin, glowing lines. The pup sighed a tired, fragile sound and nudged its nose once more against the pink fabric before finally letting its eyes close. "Hang on, little sentinel," Ethan said. "We're not leaving you behind." For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't just driving to get away from somewhere. He was driving towards something. Winter settled thick over Denver's back streets as Ethan guided the truck off the highway and into narrower roads where the snow lay untouched and quiet, street lamps casting pale halos onto shuttered storefronts. He told himself he was just looking for somewhere safer to stop, somewhere out of the wind, but the truth pulled at him like an unseen tide. He did not want to let go of the pup or the pink backpack. Not yet. Not until he could understand why a creature that young would cling to an object with the kind of devotion he had once seen in men twice his age who refused to abandon their posts. The truck heater rattled, fighting stubbornly with the cold sucked in through tiny leaks in the cab. Ethan glanced sideways as the puppy shifted, nudging its nose into the backpack again, as if checking once more that the thing it guarded had not vanished. Its breath came slow, more steady now, but each movement held a fragile intent. No mindless attachment, no random habit, purpose. Ethan remembered how that felt and hated the familiarity of it, because it reminded him of the past he had spent months trying to drown in the long, quiet miles of winter roads. People passed by, cars rolled past, but he saw none of them. His world had narrowed into the tiny weight pressed against the backpack and the questions he could not force away. Who gave you this job, kid? And why do I feel like I've walked back into the wrong war? His hands tightened on the wheel until he felt the old ache in his knuckles, a memory of training drills and sand-filled gloves, knuckles bloodied from one too many walls, punched when orders didn't make sense. The silence inside the cab was heavy enough that he found himself speaking before he could stop. "I'm taking you somewhere warm," he said, voice low, "but I'm not touching what's yours." The pup gave no response, yet something in its stillness felt like acknowledgement, like a permission offered without words. Ethan drove until a faint glow rose from a 24-hour gas station on the corner of a residential stretch, its windows fogged from heat inside. He parked along the side, engine rumbling, debating what came next. He couldn't bring the pup straight in. The cold had wrapped itself around the little creature too long, and the sudden warmth might shock its body. He reached across the seat, his fingers brushing the backpack's surface, feeling tiny sticker edges under the fabric. A name once written there flickered again in his thoughts, blurred letters he could not fully read. He imagined small hands gripping the straps, hugging the pack close, whispering something into the fabric before letting it go. He felt the weight of that thought settle into his chest like a stone. Responsibility wasn't something you chose. Sometimes it chose you first. He lifted the backpack gently, keeping the pup close with his other arm. When he stepped out of the truck, the cold cut sharp under his coat and snow crunched beneath his boots with a sound that hollowed out the silence. Inside, warmth settled on his shoulders like a reminder of life he had been avoiding. The gas station attendant barely looked up, a tired man whose name tag read Clark, who muttered a distracted greeting without interest or suspicion. Good, Ethan thought. The world didn't need to notice him right now. He bought a bottle of water, a small packet of soft dog treats, and a roll of first-aid gauze. Clark raised an eyebrow, maybe wondering why someone would buy those together at midnight in a winter storm, but said nothing. Ethan respected that. People who kept their questions to themselves were rare. Outside, snow drifted lazily from a sky deep as steel. Ethan settled back into the truck, unscrewed the cap, and poured a little water into his cupped hand. The pup sniffed, hesitated, then lapped weakly, the tiny tongue scraping warmth from his palm. Ethan didn't move away. The backpack rustled faintly as the pup leaned in, again nuzzling the fabric with renewed urgency, as if afraid thirst might have loosened its grip on what mattered most. Ethan watched, swallowing past a tightness in his throat. "Who trusted you with this?" he whispered. The pup blinked slowly, its eyes reflecting tired determination, the kind forged not by strength, but by loss. Ethan reached for the gauze and wound it loosely around one strap, reinforcing a frayed seam that threatened to split. It was a clumsy gesture, a makeshift fix, but the pup seemed to watch every motion, tense with attention. He wondered if it recognized the act as something closer to respect than repair. The heater hummed, warming the cab enough that the pup's shivers eased. Ethan leaned back, staring through the windshield where snow blurred the glow of passing headlights into long streaks of white. He had promised himself he wouldn't get involved again, wouldn't let the weight of someone else's struggle settle on his shoulders. But here he was, unable to let go of a creature that clung to a backpack as though it were the last remaining piece of its world. A knock on the window startled him. A woman in a parka stood outside, phone in hand, gesturing for him to lower the glass. Ethan cracked it open, wary by instinct. She introduced herself briefly as a nurse heading home from a late shift, her voice edged with concern as she asked whether the pup was all right and if Ethan needed directions to the nearest emergency clinic. He nodded, thanked her, memorized the address she recited, and watched as she hurried back to her car, engine revving before she pulled away into the snow. Her presence lingered like a soft imprint, the kind left by people who genuinely cared about small things others ignored. He wondered if she had children, wondered if she recognized something of herself in the backpack and the pup. He didn't dwell on it. He simply turned the ignition and guided the truck toward the clinic she had mentioned, tires whispering over the road. The streets narrowed as he entered a neighborhood with old houses, two-story structures, watching over one another with dark windows and frost-lined roofs. The clinic's sign glowed pale blue against the snow. Ethan parked near the entrance but didn't move to get out. The pup stirred again, pressing closer to the backpack, as if sensing that whatever happened next might threaten the fragile balance it guarded. Ethan rested his hand against the pack gently, feeling a faint rigidity under the fabric, something more structured than clothing or toys. Memory pulled him backward, unbidden. His son once hiding crayon drawings under Ethan's pillow, drawings of the two of them standing tall beside a house drawn with thick lines and bright windows, the kind that shimmered with childish hope. He hadn't known how much those drawings meant until they stopped coming. That same ache tugged at him now, quiet and merciless. He inhaled sharply, grounding himself. "I won't open it," he said to the pup, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not unless I have to, but you need help, and I can't give you all of it." The pup's gaze held his for a heartbeat, and in that moment Ethan thought he saw memory flicker there too, as if someone had once spoken similar words into its tiny ears. He opened the truck door, braced himself, and stepped out with backpack and pup held secure. The wind bit harder now, snow stinging his cheeks, as though the world itself wanted to resist what he was about to do. Each footstep toward the clinic felt like a decision written in stone. But before he could knock, before he could even reach the entrance, the pup shifted violently in his arms, wriggling just enough to force its nose toward the street behind them. A car had pulled up at the far end of the lot, headlights slicing through the falling snow. Ethan couldn't see the driver clearly, but something about the stillness inside that vehicle set, every old instinct roaring awake, the same instinct that once warned him of tripwires and ambushes in places where silence had teeth. The pup whimpered once, softly, and buried its head against the backpack. Ethan tightened his grip as the distant door of the car clicked open. Snow thickened over Denver as dawn struggled to color the sky, the rising light turning the clinic's frost-covered windows into muted mirrors that reflected only what someone brought to them. Ethan didn't move at first. He stood rooted just outside the entrance, the pup and the pink backpack held tight in his arms, watching the vehicle at the far end of the lot. The door of the unfamiliar car remained open for several seconds, long enough to make him wonder whether someone waited inside for him to flinch. Wind rushed across the asphalt, carrying a dry hiss that scraped at his nerves the way distant gunfire once had. Every old instinct told him to turn away, to hide the pup behind him, to place himself between danger and the thing he didn't fully understand yet. But the clinic door behind him offered warmth, and the pup's faint trembling reminded him that hesitation was a luxury he could no longer afford. The vehicle door shut. Its engine revved softly, idling like a held breath. Ethan stayed still, jaw tightening, not from fear but from memory. Once, back in another life, he had learned to read silence. Silence could be a strategy. Silence could be a weapon. Silence could be a plea. He didn't know which kind this was, but he no longer had the patience to parse it in the cold. He pushed the clinic door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. Warmth hit him like a wall, thick and almost overwhelming compared to the bitter air outside. A faint scent of disinfectant drifted through the waiting room, mixed with something floral and unexpectedly comforting. A receptionist looked up from behind the counter, a woman with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, Maria. She took in Ethan, the pup, the backpack, and for a moment her expression changed. Not curiosity, not shock, but recognition of something that didn't require words. She didn't pry. She simply asked how she could help. Ethan's voice felt oddly small in the warm air. The pup needs care. It's been out in the cold and it won't let go of this pack. Maria nodded and motioned him toward a seat. The vet is in. We'll see to the little one soon. Her tone carried a steady assurance Ethan hadn't realized he needed. He sat carefully, keeping the pup and backpack close. The pup pressed its head deeper against the bag, its tiny body taut with vigilance, as if afraid that warmth meant surrender. Ethan rested a hand lightly on the pack, feeling again that structured weight within, something not meant to rattle loose. It reminded him of classified documents he had once guarded without understanding their full implications, trusting only that someone above him knew why they mattered. He wondered now whether that same chain of faith had broken somewhere for the pup's previous owner, leaving this small thing as the last link in a story, yet unfinished. Maria made a quiet call to the back, then returned with a clipboard. Ethan filled the form with minimal information. He hesitated at owner, leaving the line blank, and Maria accepted it without comment. He appreciated her restraint more than she could know. Moments later, a door cracked open, and a man in a simple uniform stepped through. Dr. Reeves, Maria introduced quickly. Ethan met his gaze, searching for signs of judgment or impatience, but found neither. Reeves gave a short nod, professional but not detached. Let's take a look. Ethan followed him into an exam room where soft lamps kept the cold at bay. He set the backpack gently on the table, keeping the pup in his arms. Reeves approached with controlled movements, speaking softly to Ethan instead of reaching directly for the pup. Has it eaten? Shown signs of dehydration? A little water, Ethan answered. Not sure about food. It came to me on the highway. Reeves nodded again, eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. Some animals attach themselves to objects when they've lost someone. It can be a form of grief. The word landed heavier than Ethan expected. Grief. It called something raw from the space behind his ribs. He tightened his grip on the pup unconsciously, as if the movement could anchor him. Reeves held out his hands, palms up. Ethan looked at the pup. It won't leave the backpack, he warned. Reeves didn't dismiss the concern. Instead, he lifted the backpack slightly, offering it to the pup as a reassurance. The pup didn't resist this time. It allowed itself to be examined while pressing a paw onto the backpack's surface, a gesture so resolute and fearful that Ethan felt his throat tighten. Something in that simple motion reminded him of the way his son once clung to Ethan's sleeve when storms rattled the windows, refusing to let go until he felt anchored again. Reeves listened to the pup's heartbeat, checked its temperature, inspected tiny pads worn from cold ground. No frostbite, he said with relief. Mild. Dehydration. Fatigue. But with warmth, food, and rest, it should recover. He paused, glancing at the backpack again. Whatever bond it has with that pack, it's strong. You'll need to respect it if you want its trust. Ethan nodded. He didn't need the advice. He'd already felt that truth in every shiver of the pup's small body. Maria brought in a shallow dish of warmed broth. When Ethan placed the dish near the pup, it hesitated, glancing toward him and then toward the door, as if expecting someone else to appear. Ethan's breath caught at the sight. "You're waiting for someone," he whispered. "Someone who told you to guard that thing until they came back." The pup leaned down, finally drinking, but only after resting one paw on the backpack, its miniature anchor. Reeves stepped aside to write notes. Ethan watched him, sensing the man's experience not just with animals, but with the humans attached to them. Reeves had mentioned grief as if it were familiar. To him, too, as if he understood the shape of loss without needing to explain it. "When you're ready," Reeves said softly. "There's a cot in the back. You both look like you need rest." The offer surprised Ethan. He hesitated, glancing toward the waiting room, half expecting the car outside to reappear, but exhaustion settled over him in heavy waves, the kind that made his limbs ache with the memory of sleepless patrols. He nodded once. "Just a few hours." Maria guided him through a side hallway to a small break room where a narrow cot sat beneath a faded blanket. Ethan lowered himself slowly, the pup cupped against the pink backpack on his chest. The heater rattled overhead, warming the air enough that his muscles began to unclench. The backpack rose and fell gently with his breathing, and the pup adjusted its tiny weight to stay connected. Ethan stared at the ceiling. He tried to push away images of the car in the parking lot, of eyes watching from a distance, of promises twisted into threats. But another image rose instead, his son laughing as he tried to drag Ethan's military bag across polished floors, insisting he could carry anything. Ethan knew now there had been a different weight in that bag, one his son never saw. The weight of duty, the weight of expectation. And now he felt the echo of it, pressed against his chest, through a child's backpack he did not own and did not understand. He closed his eyes only long enough for sleep to drag him under. In that half-dreaming state, he imagined a small hand writing a name on the backpack's flap, pressing letters into the fabric with a determination no one noticed. He imagined someone whispering into the pup's fur, asking it to guard what mattered most. He woke hours later with that imagined whisper echoing through him like a memory he couldn't claim. The pup stretched, stirring him gently. Ethan sat up, the backpack sliding into his hands again as if it belonged there. He stood, steadying himself, ready to face the day outside. But when he left the break room and stepped into the clinic's hallway, Maria met him with quiet urgency. "There was someone asking about a lost pink backpack," she said, voice low. "They didn't give a name. They just asked if anyone brought one in during the night." Ethan felt his heartbeat shift, slow at first, then faster, a controlled escalation, like the opening seconds of an operation he hadn't signed up for. The pup pressed its nose into the backpack, as if sensing the same danger. Ethan tightened his grip. "Did they say why?" he asked. Maria shook her head. "No, but they sounded intent." Ethan looked toward the door, toward the cold waiting beyond the glass, and a single thought cut through every other. Whoever wanted the backpack had found a trail. He turned back to Maria, voice steady. "If they return, tell them nothing. I need a little time." Maria didn't ask questions. She nodded once, sealing the unspoken agreement. Ethan adjusted the backpack, cradled the pup close, and stepped outside into the sharpening wind, knowing the next move would decide whether he was simply helping a lost pup or stepping back into the weight of someone else's unfinished promise. Behind him, the clinic door clicked shut, and somewhere beyond the next block, a car engine started, quiet and patient, as if waiting for its chance. Snow fell in thin, diagonal lines across Denver, driven by wind that whistled through narrow residential streets and rattled loose shutters like impatient fingers, tapping at doors that would not open. Ethan stepped away from the clinic with the pink backpack pressed against his chest and the pup held securely in the crook of his arm, moving with the quiet urgency of someone who sensed a tide shifting beneath his feet. He did not know how far behind the unnamed pursuer might be, but the knowledge that someone had already asked about the pack pressed a cold weight into his thoughts, heavier than the winter air. Trust was a muscle he had not exercised in years, yet he felt a faint thread of it toward Maria and Reeves, who had helped without demanding answers. Even so, he knew he could not linger. The pup stirred weakly, its nose brushing the backpack as if confirming that Ethan had not abandoned what mattered. That small gesture struck him deeper than he expected, loyalty that pure made him feel unworthy of carrying the burden the pup could not explain. Ethan reached the truck and paused with his hand on the door handle, scanning the street the way old training demanded. The early hour meant little traffic, but the quiet felt watchful, alert. He slid into the driver's seat, settling the pup beside the backpack where it promptly leaned its head against the fabric, half asleep yet fiercely anchored. Ethan started the engine, the vibration thrumming into his hands like an elevated heartbeat, and guided the truck through side roads toward a neighborhood he remembered for its anonymity. He needed a place to think, not somewhere to hide, but somewhere he could breathe without expecting headlights to appear behind him every second. The snow thickened as he drove, softening edges of buildings and sidewalks until the world looked unfamiliar, a blank slate waiting for someone to imprint meaning onto it. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. Unknown caller. He declined the call, pulse tightening, wondering if whoever wanted the backpack was testing possible numbers at random. He turned down a side street lined with parked cars and dim porch lights. Halfway down the block, light spilled from a small cafe with frosted windows and a sign that flickered but did not go dark. A refuge, temporary and quiet. Ethan parked and lifted the pup and backpack again, feeling the pup's small body tense at the shift in air, as if bracing for an unseen threat. Inside, the cafe was warm enough that Ethan felt the sting of thawing fingers. A bell chimed softly as he entered. Behind the counter, a young woman wiped down mugs and glanced up with muted curiosity. Her name tag read Hannah, and her eyes held the weary brightness of someone used to late-night customers whose stories she never asked but always noticed. She nodded once, wordlessly granting him permission to sit anywhere. Ethan chose a corner table near the fogged window where he could watch the street without being easily seen. He set the backpack on his lap and rested the pup against it, feeling its breathing steady as though the cafe's warmth softened some deep alarm. Hannah approached to take his order, but paused when she saw the pup's vigilant posture. Ethan shook his head slightly, signaling that explanations wouldn't come. To her credit, she accepted it and simply recommended the strongest coffee they served. He appreciated that more than he could say. When she returned with a mug hot enough to steam the glass, her voice held a quiet tone he hadn't expected. Whatever you're carrying looks heavy. Just remember, people don't have to do everything alone. Ethan nearly laughed, not at her, but at the irony. He had lived most of his adult life believing exactly the opposite, taught that reliance was a liability and vulnerability was something to bury deep under mission briefs and ranks. Yet here he was, sharing silence with a pup that refused to let go of the last thread tying it to someone else's world. After a moment, Ethan answered, "Some things don't stay behind just because we walk away." She didn't ask what he meant. She simply nodded and left him to his thoughts. The pup shifted, letting out a small sound that cut through his focus, a sound that was not pain, but longing. Ethan recognized it instantly because it echoed something inside his own chest. He placed a hand on the backpack, feeling the faint hardness within again, as though the object itself held a heartbeat. He considered opening it right there, but something stopped him, not fear of what he might find, but respect for the unseen promise that kept the pup bound to it. Breaking that bond before understanding it felt like betrayal. Instead, he closed his fingers gently around the zipper pull, as if testing the weight of the choice without making it. The bell over the cafe door chimed again. Ethan didn't turn immediately, but the shift in the pup's posture made his neck tighten. Its tiny body went rigid, gaze fixed on the entrance. Ethan drew a slow breath, counting silently to steady nerves that did not shake, but sharpened. He forced himself to look. A man entered with heavy steps, shaking snow from his coat. His eyes scanned the room quickly, not rudely, but with intent. Hannah greeted him, but he barely acknowledged her before stepping aside to read the chalkboard menu. Ethan watched carefully. He had once been trained to identify threats by their gait, their silence, their attention. This man did not feel like immediate danger, but something in the pup's reaction unsettled him. The pup's gaze did not track the man. It tracked the doorway, as if expecting someone else. Ethan tightened his grip on the backpack again. A memory surfaced of his son hiding behind him whenever strangers knocked on their door, trusting Ethan to stand between him and the unknown. That instinct rose again now, uninvited but welcome, reminding Ethan that some responsibilities had never fully left, even when his family had. He sipped his coffee, warmth spreading through his chest, and stared out the fogged window at the pattern of snow piling against the curb. He wondered whether someone was already hunting for where the pup might have gone after the highway. The thought made his shoulders tighten, as if preparing for weight he could not yet see. When Hannah passed by again, she paused, hesitated, and then spoke softly. "Someone called earlier asking if we'd seen a pink backpack. We said no." Ethan's pulse sharpened. The timing was too precise to ignore. "Did they leave a name?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, lowering her voice. "Just said they were looking for something important," sounded tense. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. The pup nudged the backpack's flap again, almost as if urging caution. He finished his coffee and stood, thanking Hannah with a nod that carried more sincerity than his few words suggested. She simply replied, "Take care out there," with a softness that felt like understanding. Outside, snow clung to his boots, and the street felt narrower than before. He reached the truck and placed the pup and backpack inside, lingering just long enough to scan for tailing headlights. Nothing obvious, but quiet streets could hide motion easily. Once behind the wheel, he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he let his thoughts settle like snowflakes on still water, each one a question. Who gave the pup its mission? Who wrote on the backpack? Who called the cafe? And what waited inside the bag that frightened someone enough to chase it through winter mornings? The pup let out a low, uncertain sound and pressed its head against the backpack as if the weight of possibility scared it more than exhaustion ever had. Ethan reached across the seat, fingers brushing the zipper pull again, feeling the cold metal against his skin. He didn't open it, but the choice hovered like a held breath. Then his phone buzzed again, another unknown number, ringing only once before falling silent. Ethan looked at the pup, then the backpack, and for the first time since this began, he felt something like resolve settle deep in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, running was no longer enough. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine growling awake. But before pulling out, he noticed faint footprints in the snow near the edge of the lot, prints too fresh to be his, leading away toward the cross street as though someone had stood there watching. Ethan stared at them a long moment, then whispered more to himself than the pup. "It's not just the bag they want." The pup shifted closer, breathing fast, as if confirming what Ethan feared. He put the truck in gear, ready to drive toward answers he hadn't wanted, and in that instant, the backpack's zipper trembled slightly from the pup's movement, revealing the faint edge of something paper-thin inside, just enough to hint that whatever was hidden there had been waiting years for someone willing to look. Denver's winter light thinned as midday approached. A pale brightness filtered through low clouds that pressed down like the weight of unfinished sentences. Ethan kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting lightly over the pink backpack, not to restrain it, but to ground himself against the tremor of responsibility that refused to leave his chest. The pup lay curled beside the backpack, half asleep, though its breathing changed whenever the truck slowed, as though part of its mind never truly rested. Ethan understood that too well. He'd once lived entire years with only half his thoughts allowed to sleep, while the other half watched for threats even behind friendly doors. He found a quiet spot on the outskirts of the city, a small parking area near a frozen lake, where bare trees circled the water like silent guardians. The space felt isolated enough to let him think, but not so remote that he risked being cornered. He cut the engine, and the quiet that followed made his heart thud louder in his ears. The pup stirred, nudging its nose toward the backpack's flap with a restless insistence that felt less like fear and more like memory surfacing. Ethan slid the bag onto his lap. The faint glimpse from the cafe, the thin sliver of paper, had been enough to change something inside him. It wasn't curiosity that drove him now. It was the realization that someone had once trusted a small being with something they could not carry themselves. And trust, once given, demanded a response, even years later. He eased the zipper open only a fraction, careful not to disturb the pup or the fragile bond that held the two together. The paper emerged like breath exhaled in winter, unfolding with a stiffness that spoke of being held tight for too long. He didn't pull it all the way free, just enough to see handwriting pressed into the page with the earnest pressure of a young hand still learning how to make letters behave. A name formed, familiar now? Lily. The ink looked faded at the edges, but still carried weight, as if every letter was a small, trembling act of courage. Ethan felt a coldness settle along his spine that had nothing to do with the air outside. Whoever Lily was, she mattered deeply to the pup, and to whoever might be searching. His pulse slowed, not with fear, but with resolve. He closed the zipper carefully, feeling the pup's anxious tension ease when the bag was sealed again. "You held on to this longer than most adults ever could," Ethan murmured to the pup. The pup blinked as if hearing something old in the cadence of his voice, something that mirrored a memory deeper than its few months alive. It shifted closer, placing its tiny paw against the bag again, anchoring itself to that fragile thread linking past to present. Ethan sat back against the seat, letting his breath fog the cold glass. He didn't open the paper fully, not yet. He sensed it wasn't time. If the pup believed the bag's contents needed protecting until the right moment, he could wait a little longer. His phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time, he let it ring. He watched the caller ID flash and disappear, a ghost of a message he refused to answer. Silence returned, thicker now. He wondered if he was becoming the type of person who listened to instinct over logic again. Logic said, "Call the authorities, hand the pup over, let someone else unravel the mystery." Instinct said, "Stay, wait, follow the trail, protect what needed protecting." Instinct had gotten him through battles that logic would have doomed. But instinct had also cost him parts of himself he could never reclaim. Ethan ran his thumb along the bag's seam, feeling places that had frayed and been hastily repaired. Someone had patched the bottom with careful stitches, too uneven for an adult, too earnest to be careless. He imagined small fingers fumbling with thread, learning to mend the way someone might learn to keep secrets, clumsily, at first, but with dedication that hardened into habit. He closed his eyes and felt the tug of old memories, his son threading his tiny hand through Ethan's fingers while walking along a beach, the weight of that small trust pressing into his palm. He remembered how he had promised to come home from every deployment, a promise he had believed was unbreakable until life fractured in a way he could not repair. The pup let out a sound that pulled Ethan back into the present, not a whine, but a short breath that carried both fatigue and expectation, as if saying, "You opened the beginning, now you carry the rest." Ethan lifted the pup gently onto his lap beside the backpack. It settled quickly, but kept its paw anchored to the bag, refusing to sever the connection even in comfort. That stubbornness stirred something in Ethan, respect maybe, or recognition that devotion this pure deserved to be honored. He was about to start the truck again when a voice broke through the stillness outside. A quiet knock on the passenger side window startled him more than a shout would have. He turned sharply, hand halfway toward where his service knife used to be, before remembering he hadn't carried a weapon in years. A woman stood outside, bundled against the cold, her face partly obscured by a scarf. She motioned carefully for him to roll down the window. Ethan hesitated but obliged halfway, while keeping his body angled to shield the pup and backpack from view. The woman introduced herself briefly as Rachel, someone who lived nearby and often walked the lake even in winter. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the effort of asking something painful. She said she had heard rumors of a small dog seen on the highway days earlier, guarding a pink backpack. She didn't press. She didn't demand. She just asked if Ethan had seen anything that might help her find who the backpack belonged to. Ethan studied her in silence, weighing caution against the instinct to give comfort. He offered only fragments. He had found the pup. The backpack was safe. No other details. Rachel absorbed his answers with a slow nod, as if grateful for even that much. Before she left, she said softly that sometimes children leave pieces of themselves behind when they're scared, and sometimes those pieces wait for someone strong enough to pick them up. She apologized for bothering him and walked away across the snow, leaving faint footprints that the wind began erasing almost immediately. Ethan watched until she disappeared beyond the trees. He breathed out slowly, feeling the echo of her words settle into him like snow on frozen ground. He wondered whether she knew more than she could bear to say, or whether she had simply lived enough life to recognize the shape of grief when she saw it. The pup nudged the backpack again, more insistent this time. Ethan placed his palm gently on the bag, a silent vow taking form without words. He didn't need to open it further, not today. But he understood now that whatever it contained wasn't just evidence or memory. It was the last message of someone who believed the world might still hold one person willing to fight for what they couldn't protect themselves. The truck remained still, engine off, as Ethan sat with the pup and backpack on his lap. Outside, a crow landed on a bench, ruffling its feathers before letting out a harsh cry that cut through the calm. Ethan flinched, though not from the sound, rather from what it pulled to the surface, the awareness that life didn't wait for courage. It demanded it, often before someone felt ready. He started the truck finally, the engine shuddering awake, as though reluctant to break the silence. As he drove back toward the city, the wind scraped against the windshield like fingernails, tracing warnings into glass. The pup pressed closer to the bag, and Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel, the lingering warmth of Rachel's words mixing with the unspoken promise resting against his chest. Just as he reached an intersection, his phone vibrated once more. Not a call this time, but a text from an unknown number. "I know you have it." Ethan's breath caught, not from fear, but from the confirmation that the chase had already begun. He looked at the pup, then the backpack, and felt an old part of himself, long dormant, wake fully. Whoever was after them was no longer guessing. They were watching. And he knew now that opening the bag would not just reveal a message from the past, it might expose a future someone was desperate to bury. The light turned green, and Ethan drove forward into snow that fell thicker than before, the pup's steady breathing reminding him that what he carried was more than evidence. It was a promise waiting to be answered. Denver's sky dimmed early, as if the day itself feared what might surface when night grew too deep, and Ethan felt that same dimming inside as he steered the truck away from the lake. Snow swirled in bursts that came and went like breaths held too long, and the rhythm of the wipers made him think of heartbeats that skip when someone is afraid to face the truth. The pup shifted restlessly on the passenger seat, one paw resting over the pink backpack as though weighing Ethan's resolve. He didn't fully understand why his grip on the wheel grew tighter with every mile, but a quiet certainty pulsed beneath his ribs. Something inside that backpack linked this pup, that name Lily, and the growing list of people who wanted the past erased. The unknown number did not call again, but Ethan sensed the silence held in tension rather than retreat. Silence could be a strategy. He had once acted the same, watching from distance, waiting for someone to make the first mistake. It was strange to feel himself in the opposite position now, carrying something someone else wanted, with a desperation sharp enough to track through storms. He drove toward a neighborhood where streetlights flickered against old brick buildings, a district where people walked fast and spoke little, where anonymity felt like a blanket rather than a warning. He parked outside an aging laundromat, its windows fogged, its neon sign buzzing quietly like a faulty memory. He chose the place not because it was safe, but because no one ever lingered long in places where everyday tasks absorbed attention. Inside the truck, warmth from the heater brushed over his hands, thawing fingers stiff from gripping the wheel. The pup nudged the backpack again with quiet insistence, and Ethan inhaled slowly. He knew he needed to inspect the interior more thoroughly, but the pup's unwavering attachment made each movement feel like trespassing into something sacred. Instead of opening the main pocket, he explored side compartments gently, searching for clues without violating the silent agreement he felt existed between himself and the pup. His fingers brushed along a small side pouch, and he found what felt like a folded piece of fabric, soft, fragile, weighted with old scent. He paused, sensing memory clinging to it, then carefully slid it halfway out. A corner of faded cloth with initials that matched the name he had glimpsed earlier. He did not unfold it. The pup leaned forward, pressing its tiny forehead against the backpack as if asking him not to go further. Ethan eased the cloth back into place, whispering, "Not yet." And the pup relaxed just a fraction. That small reaction felt louder than words. He wondered how many times someone had told the pup or the person who owned the bag that exact phrase. Not yet, not now, not safe. The words can trap or protect, depending on who speaks them. A soft tapping jolted him from thought. A man stood outside the passenger window, coat zipped high, scarf wrapped tight. His eyes flickered briefly between Ethan and the pup, registering concern rather than threat. Ethan lowered the window just enough to speak. The man introduced himself quickly as Mr. Carter, a school counselor who lived nearby and sometimes patrolled the streets during winter nights to check on vulnerable youths. His voice carried a steady kindness that reminded Ethan of people who used empathy as armor. Carter explained he had heard police chatter earlier about missing evidence linked to a domestic case, though he didn't mention details. He then asked whether Ethan had seen a child's backpack anywhere, his tone gentle but edged with urgency. Ethan held his gaze and answered with caution. "Something found me instead." Carter didn't press. People who worked with children often recognized invisible boundaries. He simply offered his number and said that if Ethan ever felt something wasn't his to carry, he would listen without judgment. Ethan pocketed the number silently, wondering whether accepting it meant he was allowing someone to help or preparing to let someone else share the burden when his strength faltered. After Carter left, Ethan stayed in the truck, heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm that mirrored his breaths. He thought of those years when he had believed strength meant refusing help, shutting doors before anyone could knock. Now he sat with a pup that could barely walk far without tiring, and yet carried more loyalty than grown men who once saluted under the same flag as he did. That loyalty demanded patience, not force. The pup stirred again, as though sensing Ethan's internal debate. Its paw drifted toward the zipper slowly, not trying to open it, but affirming ownership. Ethan placed his hand gently beside it, palm warm against cool fabric, and something settled between them, an unspoken pact not to break the seal before its time. He wondered whether Lily, whoever she was, had once rested her hand in that same place, promising the pup something it could not understand but still chose to honor. He wondered how much a child could bear before needing someone else to hold the weight. The truck felt too small for the questions crowding his mind. Ethan stepped outside, backpack and pup secured against him, as snowflakes clung to his coat. He walked toward the laundromat's back alley, where dumpsters lined up beneath a half-frozen fire escape and graffiti clung to walls like half-faded confessions. The air smelled faintly of detergent and rust. Ethan stopped near a wall sheltered from the wind, breathing slowly, grounding himself in sensations so the past did not drown him. His mind flickered to memories of military briefings where tangled truths were sifted through carefully, each fragment of information held up like a shard of glass reflecting something more. He wondered if the paper bearing Lily's name was a shard of that kind, dangerous if mishandled, but necessary to see clearly. He heard footsteps crunching snow nearby, and tension coiled through his muscles instantly, but a moment later, the sound softened as the person passed without slowing. Ethan watched their silhouette disappear into the streetlight's glow. Not everyone was a threat, but anyone could be. He returned to the truck and sat in silence again. The pup curled onto his lap, one paw resting against his arm rather than the backpack this time, as if offering something close to trust. Ethan felt warmth spread beneath his ribs, a fragile warmth that frightened him almost as much as danger did. When you lose someone, warmth becomes unfamiliar, almost unwelcome, because it reminds you of what you can't reclaim. Yet here it was, small and breathing. His phone buzzed once more. A new message. Ethan's stomach tightened as he read it silently. "Stop looking, it's not yours." He didn't reply. Instead, he typed a short message to Mr. Carter. "If someone asks about a backpack, don't talk. Someone's watching." He didn't know if that was trust or instinct, but the line between them blurred. He placed the phone face down. The pup nudged his hand once, as though attempting reassurance, though its eyes held worry, born not of knowledge, but memory. Ethan whispered softly, "We're not backing off now," and the pup relaxed into him again. Snow coated the windshield until the outside world became a blur of gray-white brushstrokes. Ethan turned the key, engine rumbling awake. The backpack shifted, and for a moment he saw the faint outline of what might be a folded photograph through the fabric's surface. Just a hint, nothing more, but enough to sharpen the pull inside his chest. Whatever Lily had placed in there had not been meant to disappear. It had been meant to endure. As he drove away from the laundromat, Ethan did not know whether the next step would bring answers or danger, but he felt something new settling inside him, a readiness he had not felt since his last. Deployment, tempered now not by command, but by choice. Duty called differently this time, not to a country, not to a mission brief, but to a child's handwriting sealed inside a backpack, guarded by a creature too small to understand its burden. Somewhere behind him, a set of headlights flickered to life, following at a distance respectful enough to disappear into ordinary traffic, yet close enough to remind him that his decision to stay involved had consequences. Ethan kept driving, snow gathering along the truck's hood like silent promises waiting to thaw, and with each mile he felt the weight of the backpack shift. Not heavier, not lighter, but clearer, as though it no longer belonged only to the past. He didn't know who would come next. But the decision was made. He would not let the story end without knowing why someone trusted a pup more than the world. Evening settled over Denver in a muted wash of gray and sodium-orange streetlight, the city damp with melting snow and the sense that something long delayed was finally pushing toward the surface, whether anyone was ready or not. Ethan drove with the steady control of habit, but inside he felt the strain of a decision tightening like a knot that refused to loosen until it was pulled fully free. The pink backpack lay on the passenger seat beside the pup, and with each red light, each slow turn, he was more aware of how long he had let the past dictate his reactions. Once he had been trained to follow orders, to move according to someone else's plan. Now there was no one above him, only a pup that refused to stop guarding a secret and a message from an unknown number trying to push him back into passivity. He had spent years letting life happen around him while he drifted. This time, he chose not to drift. He turned toward a part of the city where the blocks grew more orderly, where brick buildings framed a broad set of steps leading up to a precinct house whose lights were never turned off. He did not intend to walk inside and dump the problem at someone else's feet without understanding it. But he wanted witnesses close enough that whoever followed him would think twice about what they dared to do. He parked across from the precinct, far enough away to avoid attention, close enough that blue and white cruisers sat within sprinting distance. The pup pushed its nose against the backpack, as if sensing the importance of where they had stopped, a small pulse of unease traveling through its body. Ethan rested his palm on the bag, feeling faint ridges beneath the fabric where paper and something harder pressed outward. He thought of all the times he had opened sealed envelopes in foreign briefings, how each had contained instructions that pulled him farther from his son and deeper into choices he could not undo. This was different. Whatever sat inside this backpack had never been meant for him, and yet it had found him anyway through the stubborn insistence of a pup that trusted orders more than its own safety. He reached for the zipper, not with the rushed impatience of curiosity, but with the measured respect of someone unsealing a last testament. The pup tensed, then did something that surprised him. Instead of pressing down on the bag to stop him, it shifted closer and rested its paw lightly against his wrist, as if granting permission while needing to remain part of the act. Ethan drew the zipper back slowly and opened the main compartment. Inside lay a folded notebook, a small stack of papers, and a cheap plastic flash drive taped to a page. On top of everything else sat a photograph, worn at the edges from fingers that must have touched it again and again. He picked up the photo first. A young girl smiled at the camera, one arm wrapped around a slightly younger version of the pup, both of them framed by a modest house and a yard that tried very hard to look like safety. Someone had written a name in the corner in the same determined handwriting he had seen before. Lily. The pup stared at the photo, its gaze sharpening with a recognition that seemed to tug at something deep inside its memory. A soft sound escaped it, not quite a whine, more like the exhale of someone who has finally heard their name after being lost. Ethan swallowed and turned his attention to the notebook. Inside, pages were filled with uneven lines, letters sometimes too large, sometimes cramped, but all driven by urgency. He skimmed entries that spoke of arguments, of a father whose temper grew harsher when money disappeared from somewhere Lily did not fully understand, of threats about leaving the country, of a promise she made to herself to protect something she believed could stop him. The last pages were different. The handwriting shook more, pressing deeper into the paper. She wrote about putting important documents on the flash drive after, overhearing conversations about accounts and transfers, about hiding that drive in the backpack, with the help of the pup that she had trained, in her small way, to stay and guard. The final lines were addressed not to a parent or a teacher, but to whoever might find what she could not carry anymore. "Please help," she wrote. "If my dad finds this, he will hurt us. Kaiser will stay. He knows how to wait. He will give this to a good person." The pup shifted at the old name, Kaiser, and even though it did not understand the meaning of the words, something in the rhythm of commands, buried in the writing, echoed its training. It had waited on that highway in winter because a child's voice had once told it to hold the line until someone kind appeared. Ethan felt that realization sink into him like a slow, heavy tide. The evidence in the notebook and whatever sat on the drive were no longer abstractions. They were the reason a pup had nearly frozen to death fulfilling a mission only a child could have imagined. He looked up across the street at the steady glow of the precinct windows. For a moment he considered walking in, handing everything over, letting the system figure out the rest. But another thought caught him. Systems failed. He had seen that. What made systems work were the people inside them willing to care, to risk, to not look away. If he handed this over, he would stay involved. Not out of obligation, but because Lily's handwriting had reached through years and distance to place her trust, however unintentionally, in whoever opened her backpack and did not turn away. Headlights glowed in his side mirror. A car moved slowly down the street and pulled into a spot a short distance behind his truck. The timing was too precise to be random. His muscles tightened. The pup's body mirrored his tension, instincts sharpened by memories of fear that lingered from whatever had happened before the highway. The driver stepped out, closing the door with deliberate control. A man in an ordinary coat, carrying no obvious weapon, the kind of man who would disappear in any crowd. He walked toward the curb, glancing once at the precinct, then crossed the street, as if he had every right to be there. Ethan recognized the posture, not as a stranger, but as someone accustomed to controlling rooms, to assuming others would not challenge him. This had to be Lily's father, whether or not he used his name. The man stopped a few feet from the truck, hands visible, voice carefully moderated. He said he was just there to retrieve something that had been taken from him, that he had heard rumors about a backpack and a dog, that he wanted to avoid making trouble. The way his eyes darted toward the bag and never softened toward the pup told a different story. Ethan stepped out of the truck, closing the door behind him with the backpack still inside. He positioned himself so that the man's line of sight to the pup was blocked. Years of training flowed back into his stance without effort, balanced, grounded, not aggressive, but immovable. He replied calmly that nothing had been taken. Something had been abandoned. The man's jaw clenched at that word. Abandoned. For a moment the mask slipped, and Ethan saw what lay beneath. Not grief, not worry, but anger at losing control. The man demanded the backpack, insisting it contained business records, private materials, things no one else had a right to see. Ethan could have argued about rights, about what Lily had written, about the evidence on the flash drive. Instead, he simply said one thing. Your daughter trusted a dog more than she trusted you. The sentence landed with the impact of a blunt instrument. The man's face flushed, his composure cracking. He took a step forward, hand lifting in an unconscious gesture of dominance, perhaps the same gesture that had once slammed doors and silenced arguments in Lily's home. In the truck, the pup saw the movement without context, but felt the surge of threat. Its heart pounded with the ingrained instinct that had led it to stand blind on hot asphalt for days. This was danger. This was the shape of what it had been guarding against. It scrambled to its feet inside the cab and pressed its nose to the glass, a tiny sentinel watching through a barrier it could not cross. Ethan did not flinch. He kept his voice level and louder now, enough to carry across the street. He mentioned the notebook by name, the flash drive, the description of accounts and transfers and plans to flee. He said Lily's teacher had noticed bruises, that people were starting to talk, that the story was no longer trapped inside one frightened house. None of that was confirmed yet, but he understood how predators worked. They feared exposure more than any weapon. The man paled, anger shifting to calculation. He glanced again at the precinct, and Ethan knew he had him. In that moment, the precinct doors opened and a uniformed officer stepped out with a cup of coffee, pausing when he saw the two men facing each other in the snow. It was a small change in the scene, but enough. Ethan raised his hand slightly and called out, not with the desperation of someone begging for help, but with the steady authority of a veteran who had decided he was done watching damage go unchecked. He said there was evidence of financial crimes and potential abuse in his truck, that he wanted to report it formally, that the person of interest was standing right in front of him. The man sputtered, tried to laugh it off, then tried to walk away, but the officer had already radioed for backup, and a second cruiser pulled up almost immediately. What followed was not cinematic. There was no brawl, no shouted confessions, just clipped questions and tight, strained answers as more officers arrived, asked to see the backpack's contents, listened when Ethan mentioned Lily's name, and the teacher who might corroborate her fears. The man's reactions gave away more than he realized. Soon he was separated from Ethan, hands behind his back, not in a dramatic display, but in the quiet efficiency of procedure. He shouted about rights, about lies, but the sound faded as the car doors shut. Through it all, the pup watched, its body taut, eyes moving between Ethan and the figures in uniform with an anxious vigilance born from a history it could not articulate. When the immediate storm of official questions settled, Ethan stood with one officer in the snow while another reviewed the notebook and photographed each page. They thanked him, told him child services would be notified, that a search for Lily's current whereabouts would begin immediately using the details in her writing. Ethan insisted they reach out to people like Mr. Carter, like any teacher mentioned in the notebook, anyone who had seen enough to know this was real. He did not want the story buried under paperwork. Hours later, after statements were taken and copies of evidence logged, Ethan found himself back in the truck, the pup curled in his lap with the backpack, now partially emptied, resting on the floor. The flash drive and most of the documents were gone, sealed into evidence bags. Only the photograph and the backpack itself remained with them, lighter now in weight, but heavier in meaning. Days passed in a blur of follow-up calls and updates. Lily was located staying with a retired teacher who had quietly taken her in, someone who had suspected the truth long before but had struggled to get anyone to listen. With the new evidence, the system could finally act. Custody hearings began, restraining orders were filed, and for the first time, Lily's safety did not rest solely on her own small shoulders. When Ethan finally met her, it was in a modest office where a caseworker introduced them with gentle brevity. She was quieter than the smiling girl in the photograph, but there was a steadiness in her gaze that had survived more than it should have. The pup froze at the sight of her, then let out a short, choked sound that was neither bark nor whine. Lily knelt and held out her hands, and the pup rushed forward, all instincts and training converging into that one moment of recognition. It pressed itself against her as if trying to erase the distance between the day she had whispered orders into its ears and the night it had nearly died, believing those orders still held. She wrapped her arms around it and the backpack at once, the last pieces of her old life and the first solid proof that someone else had taken her seriously. Ethan watched, feeling something in his chest loosen, not by forgetting his own losses, but by seeing that loyalty, when honored, could lead to healing instead of destruction. Lily looked up at him and thanked him, not with dramatic speeches, but with a simple statement that Kaiser had waited just like she knew he would, and that someone good had finally come. Later, when legal processes allowed it, Lily was placed with a relative who lived away from the house that held all her worst memories. The pup went with her, no longer a sentry over a burden, but a guardian of a new beginning. The pink backpack, once heavy with secrets, became just a school bag again, still worn at the edges, but now filled with notebooks and pencils instead of fear. Sometimes Ethan visited. He never stayed long. He would watch Lily throw a ball in a small yard while the pup bounded after it, still alert, still protective, but free from the weight of waiting for a rescue that might never come. Each time he left, he felt a little less like a ghost drifting through his own life. On one such visit, Lily quietly pressed something into his hand before he climbed back into his truck. It was a folded piece of paper torn from the notebook, a page on which she had written new words with steadier handwriting. "Thank you for listening when I was not there," it read. "Thank you for being the good person." Ethan held the note for a long moment, then tucked it into the same inner pocket where, for years, he had carried reminders of the son he had lost. Grief remained, but it no longer stood alone. It shared space now with the knowledge that he had stepped forward when it mattered for someone else. As he drove away under a calmer sky, the roads clearer and the snow receding into patches, Ethan realized the constant hum in his chest had changed. He was still a man, marked by loss, still someone who woke some nights hearing echoes of battles long past. But he was no longer only that. Somewhere in the city, a girl was safe. A pup slept without needing to guard anything more than a child's dreams. And a pink backpack hung on a hook by the door of a new home, its secret spent and its purpose fulfilled. For the first time in years, Ethan did not drive to escape the silence. He drove toward a life where silence could mean peace rather than absence, guided not by orders, but by the quiet, enduring weight of a promise that had finally been honored. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come quietly, through small moments that look ordinary at first glance. A child who still believes in goodness, a puppy who refuses to abandon hope, or a weary man who chooses, even after great loss, to stand up once more and do what is right. In our everyday lives, many people are silently waiting for a good person to appear, not to fix everything, but simply to listen, to care, and to stay beside them until the darkness becomes bearable again. Perhaps this is how God works most of his miracles, through ordinary hearts that choose compassion instead of judgment, courage instead of silence, and tenderness instead of fear. If this story touched you today, carry one thought into tomorrow. Never underestimate how far a single act of kindness can travel, for God may turn it into the miracle someone has prayed for. Before you leave, I want to say a short prayer for you. Dear Lord, bless every person listening now. Give strength to the tired, hope to the lost, and peace to those carrying heavy burdens. Guide their steps so that they may become the good person someone is waiting for. Amen. If you received this message, comment Amen below. Share this story to bring light to someone else, and subscribe to join us again. Because more stories of grace and hope are still waiting to be told. May God bless you and walk with you through every ordinary day.